I'd now like to introduce our second speakers for the day. The presentation will be given by Asunción Molinos Gordo in conversation with Soledad Gutiérrez. They will discuss Asunción's film Barruntaremos, commissioned by TBA 21 First Stage, that looks at other ways of sensing landscapes through the voice and experience of Pedro Sanz Moreno, a shepherd from the region of Segovia, Spain. So please join me in welcoming Asunción and Soledad to the stage.
So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much to Jonathan for this wonderful storytelling piece. No? Like it's getting in a completely different mood. And yes, and now I feel like kind of going back to the artistic practice at the same time that very much reflects on many of the things that we are going to present and introduce. So I'm going to do a short introduction of what was the context to producing and commissioning this piece, and also what were the driven elements to the conversation. Because I'm going to try to go to the slide. So to give a bit of a background, I work for TBA 21, that's Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary, that was founded 20 years ago. We are celebrating the 20th anniversary by Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, and the idea was to create a foundation where she could unfold like her greatest concerns in connection with social justice, climate change. In that moment, it wasn't climate change, it was more environmental justice, and through commissioning arts, or through the lenses of art. So 2020, suddenly, we faced the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, the first lockdown, and suddenly, we were in this moment where we didn't know what we were going to do. We started reaching out to our colleagues, not only artists, but also cultural producers from different places, from different positions in the world. And we felt there was a sense of urgency of continue working, but without the conditions, without the spaces. Now this gathering today is a celebration because we are together for the first time in many, many times. But at that moment, we felt that it was really important to continue doing what we knew how to do, that was commissioning art, but commissioning art in a different circumstances. So we came to create a stage that's TBA 21 on a stage that was a digital platform where we wanted to manifest, to present these conversations we were having with these different artists, cultural agents, different locations, because we felt that was important, continue working, continue producing new pieces. Also, we realized that over-information sometimes produces de-information, and suddenly you were reading the newspapers, you were watching TV, and you only knew about COVID, which was relevant, it was dramatic, but still there were many other urgencies. There were many topics that were really relevant to different communities far-flung to us, ourselves, and it was difficult to learn about them. So how we made them visible, how we could share them with other people. And then there was another question that is like how can we make accessible art in a digital manner? No, like changing, like suddenly we all went digital. And what that digital means, I mean, it's really useful, it's really meaningful for a piece. So with a conversation with many of the artists we were working with, suddenly there was like kind of this invitation, let's do something digital. And it was like, what for? What are we going to do? I mean, I'm a performance artist, what do I do? Do I perform on Instagram Live? And we were like, oh, well, no. I mean, it's like, it grew up with the artists, no? And I feel really grateful because those conversations created this platform where we came to present different ways of working, different moments of the production process also, because the idea was supporting. So in this case, the works that are presented on a stage don't belong to TBA 21. They belong to the artists. And they remain to their property, so they can unfold them in different moments. So there are pieces that are more like kind of a first essay, a first attempt. There are others that work as a piece, no? In the case of Asun, because sometimes they also come from a long research process. It's not that come out of a unique conversation. So we created a platform, and we started like producing pieces. And one of the things we did realize that there was a need to go back to the roots. We were making many questions ourselves about healing. That was something that everyone would reach out. Like, I was working on this, but now I want to work on what does it mean healing? And also, I want to go back to the ancestral knowledges. I want to go back to my place. Also because many of the artists we were working with, suddenly they were at their places, not living anymore on those artistic centers, but living in the homes where families, and going back to what they were sometime, what they have learned from. So it was a very interesting process. And we organized the works around a series of curatorial threads. And I'm going to read you the description of one that has been very important. And I think it really addresses many of the things we have discussing these days. And it's totally the beginning of our conversation, no? Because there is like those curatorial threads have been unfolded through 20 years of practice. So we have been speaking about places of, we are thinking from and with the ocean, that it's one of the main threads within the foundation, politics of speech and silence, the planet in transformation. There was one that was created because of this healing need, no? Trailblazing into the unknown. That was something that was very much connected to what we were feeling at that moment. And there was one that it's connected very much what we were speaking now. So it's spaces of unexpected learning. And I read because we dedicated a lot of time to choose the words. Certain kinds of knowledge perpetuate imperial hierarchies, violent and colonial systems of power. This thread, working with spaces of unexpected learning, explores other ways of being and learning, of listening and unlearning, that we thought it was really important, no? The idea of the body, like how you experience and how you unlearn. The exercise of social freedom opens a debate on what counts as knowledge and the ways in which it can be accessed, guarded, and passed on. No? This idea of how we receive the knowledge, how we live in it, and how we relate it to others, and how we transport it through generations, so how we make it meaningful. And that was the beginning of a conversation with Asun, that in the case of a stage, it manifests in the 5 formats we present the contents with, because as I said before, I mean, in the beginning, the artists were reluctant in terms of like presenting something online. What happens with things that are placed online? So what we created were like 5 formats that helped to contextualize the pieces and also make them accessible to the different people that might come to a digital venue. No? And we have the artwork that we're going to see in a bit. We have a conversation between the artist and the curator to go deep into the production process. There is a podcast that it's one of the most popular series. And the podcast precisely deals with why that topic. No, why did Asunción choose to work with this piece? What she was trying to research, what she was trying to attempt. No? And in this case, we will refer to it later, but it was a very interesting conversation. And then a research cluster that also shared like some of the links or some of the articles, some of the reference the artist was working with. Because sometimes, even if we search for a topic on Google, there are like so many readings and so many different approaches to the same topic. So we thought that it was really interesting to direct and to share, because also it's an act of generosity. Share your sources and what you are reading for. And the last element is like how me, as a visitor, as a viewer, can engage with this topic. And we created a call to action where artists were invited to propose a signature petition, funding call for any causes that were related to the practice. No? In the case of Asunción, we can speak about that later, but it's something that came afterwards. in a moment where she felt that there was need for something. So it was like supporting the rural health in Spain, but it was like 6 months or even 1 year later after the work was presented. But it was an opportunity to continue the conversation. So that's what we started the conversation from, no? Like researching those spaces of unexpected learning. And that's what Asunción brought in.
Yeah, I mean, this is the, that was the situation under which the piece was created. As Soledad mentioned, when she came with the invitation, I was like back home. I was back in my village, dealing with family matters. And when she came with the invitation, it was like a challenge and something very fresh as well, just to get me out of that situation, at least symbolically. So I remember at the time, it's like, listen, Soledad, I'm for a long time I've been wanting to work with this person called Pedro Sanz. He's a family friend, like my brother and my friends contact him regularly because he knows how to forecast the weather using this technique in Spanish called Cabañuelas. So the Cabañuelas is like this methodology that has been used by rural communities, farmers and shepherds alike, from the medieval times, which is very difficult to trace when you ask historians, okay, where is the origin of this? No clue, no documentation, no testimonies, nothing. Pedro was someone that my friend Diego was continuously talking about. Eduardo Perote finally got me the contact. And I have to say that basically the place where I come from, this is this river called Duero, that used to be like the frontier between the Christian kingdoms and the Arab kingdoms back in the medieval times. It's an area that is essentially a farming land of cereal and grapes. And these guys, like for farmers, it's incredibly important to know what the weather is going to be like. So although, yes, they do look online on all of the apps and everything, at the same time, they still consult Pedro and many other people who know how to forecast the weather. And not only for farming matters, to organize your working year, to know when is the best time for plowing, for seedling, for anything, but also for other things like weddings. If you're gonna get your daughter married and you don't want the rain on that day, it's like, Pedro, is it going to rain on the 21st of August? And so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, let me see what's here. Yeah, so this is, how I met Pedro. So he's not from my region, he's from La Raíz de Abajo, it's like another area in Segovia. And it was, approaching him, and he's like, okay, I'm a friend of this person and stuff like this, and I want to do this thing with you. So he immediately welcomed the idea, and so it was very, very, very easy. Also because in a way it was like, as I said, a family friend. So I will develop more about the ideas behind the film, but I think so we can all be in the same ground. We can probably just watch it now. It's like it's like a 9 minutes film. Perfecto, ¿no? ¿Qué tal? ¿Bien? Vale. Pues nada, ¿qué son las cabañuelas?
Pues eso, las cabañuelas es un método de la meteorología para adivinar cosas de esas de la atmósfera y si va a venir alguna borrasca y cosas de esas del tiempo. Se hace los primeros 7 días de agosto y luego del 13 al 24 de diciembre. Y luego hay que juntarlo más o menos para ver si coincide ya luego los meses del año anterior. Luego ya. Yo lo más reciente, yo llevo haciéndolo por mí, va a ser 15 años. Soy Pedro Sanz Moreno, del Radio de Abajo. He sido pastor, pero ya me encuentro jubilado. Yo abarco, para mí, todo Castilla y León. Porque yo no puedo decir, por ejemplo, cuando está lloviendo o viene por abajo, aire de eso del Levante, ahí en Cádiz, pues yo no llego hasta allí. Pero aquí sí, de Castilla y León y por ahí, pues sí, porque luego ya la gente ya me preguntan de Soria, de Burgos, eso. Yo, sí, pero yo en Galicia muchas veces que llueve más que ningún sitio. En Galicia se rápido entra la borrasca, se va para la parte de Asturias, por ahí, como hoy, está nevando arriba en Asturias, por ahí está nevando hoy, pues allí yo no llego, ¿entiendes? pues, barruntar es que va a haber próximamente una borrasca o viene el airón, por ejemplo, o cosas que a lo mejor dentro de 48 horas, pues es igual que la nube de hoy, se está levantando y a lo mejor a la tarde otra vez vuelve a llover, algo, ¿entiendes? Y por eso están barruntando y sube cada vez, crecen más las nubes. Si no, no había ninguna nube, si no barruntara nada, ¿comprende? Sí. Las nubes, estando el cielo raso, estrellado, por la noche, pues están durmiendo. Y luego sobre las 10, de 10 a 11 por la mañana, ya se despiertan y ya salen para arriba y se van creciendo, como hoy lo estamos viendo que están creciendo, cada vez está creciendo más la nube porque se han despertado. Sí, aunque esta noche han dormido menos porque está nublado, y estando raso es cuando más duermen las nubes. Sí. Para los 40 días va a llover. 40 días más o menos va a llover porque están arriba en la montaña y entonces pues se desarrolla, luego a los 40 días va a llover. Y el viento, el viento, hay muchas clases de viento. Por ejemplo, hay viento del norte que le llaman el cierzo porque es viento más seco. Entonces baja muchísimo la temperatura si viene del norte. Si viene del sur, pues lo dice siempre, aire solano, agua en la mano. Quiere decir que a las 24 por ahí está lloviendo por el aire del sur. Y ya si viene, por ejemplo, del este, como estos días atrás que viene como ha levantado las canículas de Marruecos para arriba, es más de niebla y de canícula, pero no llueven. La niebla, muchos días de niebla, pues sí que barrunta, que va a nevar. Tarde o temprano, antes de una semana va a nevar, porque barrunta mucho. La niebla muy baja, que molesta mucho, porque hay niebla que rápido se levanta. Pues siempre dicen que la niebla antes del 20 de enero aguanta más, pero ya llegando a San Sebastián, del 20 de enero, después de las 2 hay poca niebla ya. En el mes de agosto, que se levanta la piedra, si está húmeda que va a llover bastante entre abril y mayo. Si está seca, poco agua va a caer. Podéis levantar mejor, si hay una piedra, habrá que hay hormigas y están tranquilas. Si están tranquilas es que no pasa nada, nada más cuando ya empiezan ellas a desfilar y cosas de esas que barruntan algo. Si están tranquilas que no... Como hoy, hoy está todo el mundo tranquilo, pues igual. Cuando empiezan a haber muchas hormigas y ya están ellas en fila buscando para guardar la comida para el invierno, pues es que barruntan que va a llover. Como vayan en fila, que barrunta que la primavera va a ser muy calurosa y poco agua va a llover, habiendo muchas orugas, ¿entiendes? Eso sí. La mayoría de los animales, de los burros, los tienen los ganaderos de vacas, porque los burros barruntan a 2 o 3 kilómetros lo más que viene el lobo. Y entonces, pues ahora que de unos años a esta parte, todos tienen un burro. Si dejan de tener burro, vienen los lobos y a la que nace un choto, pues se les comen, ¿entiendes? Sí. Los burros por las orejas, sí. Eso lo barrunta con las orejas, los oídos, pero mucho, sí. Es el animal que mejor oído tiene. Son listos, porque aunque son burros de nombre, pero luego son listos. Ya puede ir donde dejarle aquí, que si le lleva, por ejemplo, a Segovia, por ejemplo, estos burros, los suelta y ellos vienen aquí, pero fato. Los burros son listos, que los llaman burros son listos, sabe dónde tiene la casa. Las ovejas barruntan mal tiempo, si se aturtan mucho, barruntan mucho aire el día siguiente. Y si no quieren entrar la tarde a la nave, pues eso que puede que, si es en invierno, barrunta que va a nevar. Si es en verano, que al día siguiente va a hacer más calor de lo debido, entonces no van a poder andar para poder comer. Porque de tanta calor no andan y entonces pues no comen, por eso lo están barruntando.
¡Toma! ¡Toma! ¡Rey! ¡Cállate para casa!
Una velocidad, coge una velocidad. Hay ovejas más los machos. Coge una velocidad de uno a la otra y viene, coge una fuerza terrible cuando se dan. Muchas veces se hacen hasta sangre en la cabeza. Del golpe que se dan, más los machos que las hembras menos, pero los machos, y como tienen celo, ese es peligroso. Y los pájaros también barruntan aire cuando están volando por el aire, ¿entiendes? Los tordos, pues los tordos son muy importantes cuando están en los árboles, al lado de una iglesia, o cuando están en los cables de la luz, en fila, barruntan agua, a los 2 días por ahí está lloviendo. Pues más me fijo cuando la luna es creciente, cuando los cuernos están así para arriba, entonces barrunta agua porque el agua no se la va a caer. Si va de lado, ahí tenemos 15 días sin agua, que no va a llover nada, ¿entiendes? Y lo malo es cuando es luna llena, si brilla mucho o brilla poco, a ver si va a helar más o menos, ¿entiendes? Por eso cuando coincidió la nevada, que coincidía con menguante, como ahora coincide, por eso heló bastante y se quedó más la nieve. Este año nada más coincide, creo que en el mes de julio nada más va a haber 5 lunas en el mes. Y eso es o bueno o malo, según, o mucha calor o mucha lluvia, ¿entiendes? Yo creo que va a ser bastante más calor de lo debido para tener 5 lunas. Pues yo el futuro lo veo un poquito raro. Como sigamos así, veo yo que no... Yo lo veo que va muy rápido, sí. Porque a menos más que ahora llevamos un tiempo que no hay casi aviones por arriba y se ha calmado, pero antes que había tantos aviones y coches, se quemaba la atmósfera y todo, y eso no es bueno. Sí, porque no sabemos cómo y de qué manera lo vamos a eso, porque como cambia todo el aire, cambia de todo, pues no sabemos ya ni los de la televisión saben cuándo viene, como cuando vino en enero esto que vino, la Filomena esta, la borrasca. O sea, sabíamos que iba a nevar algo, pero no sabíamos de golpe tanto, por eso, porque el clima ya no es normal tampoco, ¿entiendes? A ver, el cambio climático, como siga así, pues no sé cómo acabaremos, porque va todo muy mal, a ver, quieren ser más importante que la naturaleza lo lleva a su ritmo, calculo yo. Antes estaban todos en el campo como tenía que ser, para mí, o no es así.
Yeah, so you just listen to Pedro disclosing, not the method, because this is one of the things that we both agreed that he didn't want to disclose, because he wanted to keep secret, how he uses, his observation to come with conclusions. So I asked him, okay, listen, I don't need to know the secrets, because he's like, no, my secret. It's like, I'm gonna totally respect your secret. I'm just interested in knowing what are the elements you pay attention to in the landscape and how we can read landscape, the methodological information written within landscape, especially coming from, like a video piece that is coming from the Thyssen-Bornemisza institution that has, like this incredible collection on landscape, and how within the fine arts kind of like area, we've been always kind of like blinded by the beauty or by the aesthetical element. So how can we disclose, how through Pedro, we could understand, the methodological information that is encrypted within landscape and these landscape elements. So we can see how he, okay, so, I probably should explain the title. Barruntar, I don't know if you notice when he's saying barruntar continuously, is the word that he uses for Inklings. Well, this is like probably the closest word when we were trying to translate it. No?
But it's not possible to translate.
It's not possible to translate. So it's more like a feeling, like sensing in a way, It's like, so this bird is sensing this, or this donkey is sensing that, or the stones, and so on and so forward. So the thing with, the way that he was, interacting had to do a lot with, the methods of the way of living in that type of context. So the thing is, throughout my artistic practice, I developed this idea that is called pensamiento campesino, that again is complicated to translate. It could be translated as peasant thinking. which is, during my practice, I've been approaching, you know, like farmers or shepherds or inhabitants of the rural as intellectuals. You know, not only as producers of like milk or goats or like, you know, like potatoes, whatever, but rather producers of ideas, producers of systems of, you know, economy and language and like a million other things. So Cabañuelas turned out to be one more example of the intellectual production of, you know, rural communities. And how, when I was thinking, you know, the word pensamiento, the word thinking, even like in the rural areas, when we talk about the word that we use in Spanish, when we say thinking, we don't say pensar, we said discurrir, and discurrir actually could be translated as flowing. You know, so the whole idea, like when you're thinking, you're flowing. And also like, and this thing about the, you know, like go with the flow is something that the farmers invented first. You know, the whole thing about Bruce Lee, be water, my friend, forget it, you know? This is not like, this guy should get the credit first. So that's the thing, like the way that rural communities throughout history have been producing knowledge is by rubbing themselves against the world, physically, you know what I mean? Like by rubbing your body, rubbing your life through the surface, not by flowing, by inhabiting in this way. So I was also thinking about the context in which Cabañuelas could only be developed is by those communities or those people who are continuously outdoors. When I start looking at how many hours I spend outdoors, being someone who's interested in the world out there, you know what I mean? It's like, wow, I spend like 1 or 2 hours a day outside of my house or my, you know, my whatever the setting is at the moment. And it's like, yeah, when you're a shepherd, because something I forgot to mention is like, Pedro was working as a shepherd throughout his life. He's the son of a shepherd as well. And he's not a sheep owner. Basically, he was employed by other tenants, or not tenants, I mean like owners of land and livestock, and he was the worker. So only by being, you know, like probably 12 hours outdoors, he could, you know, like develop, you know, all of this observation, all of these methods, and
that's something also is changing a lot, even in the rural areas. No, if you think about, I mean, I used to live in a small town in the farmland, and now people are leaving the farmland to live in the towns. That it's also a big change, no?
Yeah.
In the region I come from, that they were normally shepherds living in the mountains. They were all day outdoors, and that has changed. Now you have like kind of the sheep or the goats somewhere. You go like maybe once a day, you check them, but it's not the same relationship with nature. Yeah,
it's just the environment is kind of ending. And basically, when yesterday, you know, like Sonush and Namrata were talking about like, you know, the entanglement, you know. So this man can see through the entanglement. He can see through the matrix. He understands like the multitude of relationships that show up between, you know, whether the stone is wet or whether the bird is flying and is doing all of the things. So he's using sensing, you know, a bit like, very much like the legend that Jonathan shared just now. The whole thing about think less and feel more is like, this is Pedro, you know what I mean? He's not from the Amazon, but he's totally, you know, like. And so basically, in his way of like developing thought and intellectual production and stuff, he's sensing things, he's acknowledging changes over time, but he's also, I mean, well, direct observation, those are all also tools that scientists share in their, you know, in their practices. But also something that it was coming a lot yesterday is the whole thing about considering, you know, like animal intelligence. So one of the things that I really like from Shahina's presentation is when she was saying, historically, humans learn how to identify medicinal plants from the animals and their decision making. So in all of these practices and many of the examples that Sonush and Namrata were sharing yesterday about your daily life and how you encounter, you know, the decision making of animals, he also considers, you know, he understands that a donkey has the capacity to acknowledge the presence of a wolf 2 kilometers away, you know, just by listening, or like this incredible, you know, like capacity to access this, and how in a way, you know, like they could also have the capacity to foresee, which is something that you know, is something that it has been also debate, like who has the capacity to foresee. So he did, you know, like he acknowledged, you know, and he find his sources also in, you know, this interconnectedness and this relationship among other elements. And just to quickly say something about like the making of, one of the things that it disclosed, the making of this film with Sonia Pueche, the camera, and Alberto, I mean, the sound man, is how ignorant we were. So basically, we were just like, every time we were doing the shootings and stuff, we were just realizing, how the way that our lives are being conceived are so restrained in having access to the experiential world, and just by dealing with interfaces and filters and one after filter and references and stuff, not having, direct experience as a source of knowledge production, and being able to have our own conclusions. No? So the thing is also
maybe to finish with the idea of the knowledge, like kind of this, that we have built modernity through the construction of an academic knowledge. And sometimes that academic knowledge cannot fit this type of practices that are very much embodied knowledges, embodied ways of doing that really need to be addressed. And I think that now we are realizing how important they are, and we are going back to them. But also, time has passed by, and I think it's really important what Asun is going to tell now, because we are losing the next generation. Because you have to learn. I mean, this language, Barruntaremos, is not used anymore. I mean, it's really weird to find someone, I mean, from my generation or the next generation that speak about Barruntaremos, about like this kind of sensing and feelings and connections with nature. So that was one of the things, no? Like kind of the difference between high knowledge and low knowledge, folk knowledge. That was something that we always wanted to bring up, no? Like kind of, there are different kind of knowledges, and we'll see now, like it doesn't question, we can build upon mixing and entangling all of them.
Yeah, because one of the things, before I talked to Pedro, I already knew he was famous, by the way. Now, I mean, I mean, he's like this amazing person and very generous. So the thing is, when they were telling me about, like, yeah, he's, like go on YouTube and try to find and stuff. So I started watching, when at the beginning of every year, the local TV goes and talks to Pedro, and he's introduced in one of the telediarios, one of the news settings at the end, as a new way or as a funny way to forecast weather. So that one day is not like the lady, with the map in the background explaining how the whole thing works. You have Pedro, and you have the journalist who goes and moves to Segovia, and they interview him. So the thing is, like, once it was painful to see how he was being approached like this funny character from the countryside who looks peculiar, who speaks with this funny accent and stuff like this. And even I tried to have this clip where the interview is like, yalla, 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 like, yalla, keep telling me your stuff, because, and he wasn't like really paying much attention. He just wanted a funny show. And it's funny how when I was looking at these videos, even the same soundtrack was being played. So I suggest you all to go Pedro Sanz on Google and YouTube, and you will hear, like, when they're doing this, they're reporting, the music is like ta ta tan 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 tan, something between circus and jazz and I don't know what, just to elaborate on the comic aspect of, the whole thing, not to take it serious, by discrediting, like Saform is like, okay, we're gonna talk about you in a way that nobody believes what you're saying. So in fact, this clip, it says, is he actually going to get it right this time? You know what I mean? Like, so it's just like this whole credit, discredit. So we come and, like we use you in a way, like you bring some lightness to the end of like a very heavy news where everything's terrible and but, whatever. So the thing is, after, we did the film, because the platform TVA21 and they have so much difusión, como...
No, it was like spread out throughout the newspapers. And also I was saying, Asunción, that it's one of the first times, maybe because it was also dealing with something that connects with more people, or it's been seen or watched on TV. Suddenly it got to many, we started receiving requests like from many local newspapers, like kind of the region from Asunción and Hingam. It was like all the local newspapers wanted to interview Asunción and Pedro, no? And suddenly it became like a phenomena in a way.
Yeah, and it challenged other sensibilities, let's say. So those who were in charge of weather forecasting, the serious one, the one you have to believe because they never make mistakes, you know what I mean? Oh my God, these guys got nervous. You know what I mean? So they started like writing in the newspapers, like, and little by little there was this young boy. His name is Jorge Rey. He comes from Burgos, also from a village called Monasterio de Rodilla. He's 14 years old. And it happened that instead of being like doing TikTok videos, he actually learned how to do the Cabañuelas. And he's like meeting with all farmers and around all people continuously and learning how to do it. And he got some media attention. And also the thing is, something happened. He said, okay, there's going to be a massive snowstorm on the 24th of Jan this year. So there was the building up of that day, you know. Is it going to get it right? Is it going to snow? Is it going to... So people were betting. People were like, you know, like the whole thing.
It got a debate. I mean, it's like suddenly, it was like kind of in the daily life conversations, like everyone, I mean, like kind of, it was like kind of the division, like utopics one, like them, and the 24th there will be a huge snowstorm. And realistic, scientific, progress people would believe it's gonna happen. It's not gonna happen because those are, I mean, those are things from the past. So it was like suddenly in Spain, where the rural is kind of really a tricky issue because we have tried to run away from, I mean, the official narrative has tried to forget that. It became like the debate on the main, I mean, at dinner, in homes, in places, like whether it was going to happen or not. The 24th, everyone knew that it might snow in Madrid.
Yeah, no, and the fact that it did not snow, you don't know what happened to this boy.
No.
You know what I mean? It's like, brrr. Imagine being 14 years old trying to learn something ancient from the medieval times, not getting it right, and just the entire country is going to, you know, throwing stones at you, you know, like, haram alek, you know, like, why? And so this is the thing, like, how can we reach, because, I mean, of course, there are limitations what any kind of, like, learning method can do and can achieve, you know what I mean? When I was like looking at, okay, how scientists know that, you know, in Neptune, the winds are very strong, and they are like 20,000 kilometers per hour. And of course, you cannot ask Pedro or, you know, Jorge to know about what's the weather in Neptune. Only a scientist will even attempt to approach to whatever thing is. So it's all about like, you know, like, rather than subtracting and like trying to either this or that, how about like, you know, like bonding or like coming together and on an equal base, you know, how can we break through, you know, like the hierarchy of knowledge production to settle the ground where different forms of knowledges can live together and achieve, you know, what you can see through the Cabañuelas, you cannot see in a satellite because nobody calls, you know, the AEMET, which is the Spanish Agency of Development, of Climate, saying, guys, you got it wrong this time. And not all of the journalists are like, you know, bombarding when they get it wrong, you know what I mean, when they miss. So it's about accepting error as part of like learning and about like experiencing and stuff. And also, I mean, how to create a platform where there's this idea of coexistence. You know, just like it happens in settlings, like, you know, the idea of the entanglement or this idea of interconnectedness. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, this is kind of like probably the idea that we would like to propose. And then we've been really much inspired by, you know, the talks yesterday. We were like, last night, sitting there with Nadia, like, how are we going to do this tomorrow? With the heads bubbling and... So yeah, I don't know you.
And also, I mean, how with very much situated practices like this one that responds to, we could open conversations in far-flung communities in different locations, but how these methodologies and how these ways of experiencing and learning from the land are really useful to be shared, to be relayed to others, and from that we can build a whole culture of them, no? That it's also like one of the things that we always, I mean, to me, I was thinking yesterday, like being today here, opening up this conversation from a piece that was produced in a town in Segovia, no? And how in Burgos, and how this come to Jamil, and how we are here thinking about agriculture, about, yeah, that's really important,
Yeah.
no? Because it triggers something that it's really human, and sometimes that's really, I mean, it's really basic, and it connects a bit with Jonathan, no? It goes back to the roots and how we live within and with nature and with other beings in a very wide sense.
Yeah. No, in fact, I mean, I remember when just we were about to catch the plane, it's like I was talking to Pedro on the phone. It's like, Pedro, I'm about to take the plane now. We're going to screen your film in Dubai. But where is this? It's like, well, Emirates. It's like, well, I just came from Benidorm. I was there like on my holiday trip. And it's like, okay, I'm doing this. It's going to happen this way, this way. Is there anything you want me to say? Is there anything? It's like, just tell them if they come by to call me. So if you anyone are by Segovia, and he will be happy to meet. He's a very generous person. He will probably not reveal the secret, which, by the way, I should mention that only Cristina, who is Pedro's niece, she's the one who is going to inherit the Cabañuelas and stuff, and she is doing the learning with him. No?